Let me introduce Cynthia Linet, who is here to be our constitutional law TED Talk guest speaker.
Second Amendment.
Second Amendment. And she's brought her art. She is an artist. She's a community activist. She's a graduate of this law school.
That's right.
And so I'm very pleased to have her here today and to give us a little bit different take and different way to think about the Constitution. And I would say community engagement, because that's really what you are, a community activist. And we're grateful to have you here and to share your wisdom with our class.
Thank you
and welcome.
Thank you. Well, before I start, I just want to thank Professor McKay for having the wisdom to allow me to present this information to you. And I thank you all for being here. I wanted you to know that I applaud your perseverance and determination. Law school is hard enough when you don't have to work, but to do it and work too, you are amazing. Okay, so I only have a half hour and I'm going to go pretty fast. I've done a lot of painting of political stuff. This show took 2 years to complete, and I think it's finished, but I've said that before. There are 70 paintings in the show. I chose these paintings because they're a fair representation of the show. I should say at the start that all my images are from photographs and posters taken directly from the internet. All you have to do is Google images of guns and sex, guns and adults, guns and religion, and you will find hundreds of images. And there are none here that have been doctored in any way. They are just as I found them. So I'm starting at the top, and I'm just going to go across each one. So although this painting was the last one I did, it's the first in the show because it says so much. It's really hard to argue with people who believe that owning a gun is their God-given and constitutional right, and really it's neither. The next few are what I have termed normal people. You know, before I started this, I had expected to see a bunch of crazy cultists holed up in Idaho somewhere, guarding themselves from our government, but that's not what I found. This first one looks like your average suburban soccer mom. The title, however, was telling. Kennesaw, Georgia. The manicured lawns belie the fact that behind every wall there is an arsenal of weapons. You know, there are 300 million guns in circulation in the United States today, and that does not include the police or the military. And every time there's another mass shooting, people just go out and buy more guns. After doing a few of these normal people, I began to wonder, when out in public, just who in that crowd of normal people was carrying. Carrying a concealed gun is legal in all states, and Washington State allows for open carry without a license or a permit. It's unsettling, to say the least. I added the cowboy to the show to remind everyone that gun control is not a new idea. There was strong gun control in the Wild West. When men came to town, they were required to turn in their guns to the sheriff, and they wouldn't get them back until just before they left town. All those shoot-'em-up westerns you've seen were mere fantasy brought to you in large part by the gun industry. The gun industry, I'm going to be talking a lot about them. The next group I looked at was guns and religion. I was really shocked to see so many Jesus-like figures with a gun. So this first one I did angered me because they took a famous painting, The Last Supper, by one of my favorite 17th century artists, Michelangelo Caravaggio, and put a gun in Jesus' hand pointed at Judas with the title WWJD. They didn't even have to spell out the words, everyone knows them. What would Jesus do? The next one had the title, Blessed are the armed, for they shall inherit the earth. How could they have distorted his message so terribly? Why, he'd be turning over in his grave right now if he had one. The next is an ad from a gun magazine titled, Give Your Honey a Gun for Christmas. Doesn't that look like fun? I'm being facetious. The next is the least offensive one I found under guns and sex. Just Google it. You'll be amazed what's there. Next, I looked at guns and the police. You do know that our police forces are being greatly militarized these days. They are getting this equipment from the military, who are getting rid of the weaponry that they claim is obsolete, so they can get more stuff from the gun industry. There are even tanks now on some college campuses. Seems like they're just waiting for something to happen. Why do we allow it? The next group I looked at were the militia groups in our country. They are all, for the most part, former military personnel, well-schooled in weaponry, who basically just love this military stuff. Oh, and a second thought, they're doing it for their country. They are not the military, nor are they any part of our government. Many of the groups just volunteer their time, but of course not all of them. The first is the watchmen. They volunteer. They just love playing soldier, and they are in several states. This picture is of an Arizona watchman. This chapter believes that they are guarding the border to stop the big drug cartels from entering the country and harming our people. Their weaponry is startling, and their protection totally ineffective. You know we have a huge problem with heroin these days in our country, and most of that heroin is coming from Mexico. Just what are they doing on the border? Then there are the watchmen in Indiana who believe they are guarding nuclear facilities from terrorists, and another group in Florida who are planning to protect the state from violent looting and robbing in the event of a hurricane. They all get together often and play soldiers. When I went to do Blackwater, that was the paramilitary group in Iraq hired by what I thought was private business interests as security. I found the video game. Now your children can become paramilitary and play soldiers too in the privacy of their bedrooms. A couple of things about Blackwater. Did you know that Hitler had a paramilitary group called Schwarzwasser, Blackwater? Blackwater has said that they're named after some creek near their property in North Carolina, but the coincidence is just too close to ignore. For years, they have been our military's private army. Our military is their biggest customer. The military insists, however, that they have at times been hired merely for security of their officers and the transporting of supplies, especially in war zones. But that is hardly the case. They do military actions in war zones at the behest of our commanders, and often accompany soldiers into war zones and participate along with them. They insist upon having complete control of their actions, accountable only to their owners, and even at times have been known to give orders to our soldiers while in battle. They also have several large compounds here in the United States and provide the military and other groups with advanced trainings. They got in trouble in Iraq and killed 17 civilians and injured another 20 in an ambush with tanks and even a military-grade helicopter. And they couldn't be prosecuted in Iraq at that time because our ambassador had signed an order preventing it. It took years to prosecute them, and finally, 7 years later, 3 of them went to jail, 1 for 20 and 2 for 30 years. And one more thing. They have changed their name to the Academy. Sounds kind of like West Point or something, doesn't it? And they are owned by Monsanto. A report by Jeremy Scahill in The Guardian revealed that the largest mercenary army in the world, Blackwater, more recently called Academy, was sold to the multinational corporation Monsanto. It remains the largest private contractor of the U.S. Department of State Security Services. So that means our military has its own private army that has complete autonomy and that answers to no one but their owners, and is owned by the company that has a chokehold on our courts and on our food. If you weren't scared before, this should give you something to think about. Oh, and another thing. Blackwater is not the only mercenary army operating in all the war zones. There are scores of them that both we and other countries hire for support. For instance, the British had 21,000 private mercenaries and only 7,000 soldiers in Iraq. I put the American Nazi in because it really shouldn't surprise you. Nazis have been in our country since the end of World War II. About 1,500 Nazi scientists, technicians, and engineers, along with their families, were quietly moved to this country as part of Operation Paperclip, where they developed the rockets for space travel and ballistic missiles. Werner von Braun came here at that time and helped to develop intermediate-range ballistic missiles for the U.S. Army. So instead of prosecuting him for war crimes and crimes against humanity, our government not only protected him, but he even received the National Medal of Science for his work. There's a book you can read about these Nazis called The Nazis Next Door. I wasn't going to tackle racism until a friend found me this one. It's titled Target Practice at Shooter's Columbus Firing Range in Georgia. Racism is, as it has always been, alive and well in this country, and most white people don't seem to get it. Many believe that because we now have a black president that racism is over. But nothing really has changed. In fact, life now for people of color is more desperate than ever before. When asked what they want to be when they grow up, a bunch of children in Ferguson said, "If I grow up, not when." Black lives matter. The next is somebody else's work, but I couldn't have said it any better. I had wanted to do a Ku Klux Klan member, but I couldn't find one with a gun. I guess they just lynch and burn. But here's the truth. Our police forces are racist. They hide behind the American flag, but when you look behind that flag, you see their true colors, a Confederate flag that represents a long history of racism. I did several family sort of groupings. This one is titled Open Carry Enthusiast in what looks like a Walmart. Doesn't that scare you? It does me. The next surprised me too. It's titled National Daughters Day at the Firing Range. Why do we allow it? When I learned that every 3 days a young child in our country kills someone, usually a sibling, and every day 8 children die from gunshot wounds, I started concentrating on the children. I think there are a dozen paintings of children in the full show. And at one point it came to me that maybe one of the children I have painted might be part of that 8-a-day statistic, and that maybe I have been painting portraits of dead children. It was then that I became most angered and began concentrating on the children. I don't understand how a parent could not only allow this to happen, but have the nerve to put it out on the internet for all to see. There have been only one image so far that I have not been able to paint, and that is of a baby gumming the barrel of a gun with their smiling parents close by. Even as disturbing as some of these images are, that one was just too disturbing, even for me. The next one shocked me too. It goes under the heading, I could not make this stuff up. Those are peace signs on her hoodie. Does she know what they mean? Does her mother know? The sign seems to be very popular these days, but in speaking to a few teenagers who were wearing shirts with the symbol, none of them knew what it meant. Interesting how our consumer culture can co-opt an image and completely obliterate its meaning. The title under the next cute one, My Parents Teach Me Personal Responsibility. What are you teaching your kids? I'm not sure what the context is. It could be an ad. And notice, that's a pink-trimmed assault weapon. The next one is a girl carrying a pink .22 caliber rifle, the name of which is the Savage Rascal. Savage is the brand name. It can be bought on the internet and in groups of 4 with all the paraphernalia in a package deal so that your child can start her own firing club with her girlfriends. We really have to stop this. And about marketing to children. You can buy pink rifles with unicorns and blue ones with penguins. You can buy zebra-striped ones. There are even cutely decorated assault weapons. And of course, the toy rifles and assault weapons are very creative and just too numerous to mention. After that, I thought I was done. But a young woman reminded me of guns and video games and guns and movies. So here's the first one that got my attention. Remember when I said those shoot-'em-up movies were pure Hollywood fantasy? Well, here it is, the barroom brawl, cowboys and Mexicans. Bet the gun industry provided the most authentic-looking guns of the time. Hollywood and the gun industry, they go so well together. And here's one of the first violent video games. It's called Postal. Do you understand that word? It became a verb after a series of mass shootings by disgruntled former postmen. To go postal is to go crazy and do a lot of shooting. This video is one of the earliest of the violent ones, and it has everything one could want. A dead Arab with a Mr. America type standing victorious on his chest, a vicious dog with blood dripping down his chest, a busty young woman with a gun placed artfully at Mr. America's crotch, and of course, the American flag. It also has the distinction of being the first game in which you got more points for killing than rescuing. The next is a more current one. It's Grand Theft Auto. Doesn't it seem familiar? Now you know where they're getting their ideas from. And all done in the privacy of their bedrooms with the consent of their parents. Video games are not merely fun and games anymore. The skills developed are the very ones that the military considers perfect for drone warfare. In the last decades, the games have been developed by the military to train our young men for the job. 4 former drone operators and now whistleblowers have just opened up about their experiences, how quickly they realized the horror of what they were doing and how they have not been able to live normal lives ever since. They were able to get out of the military by claiming they could not do the job anymore, and once out, they were offered huge bonuses, $100,000 for one, to re-enlist. Gamers are being recruited by countries all over the world now as drone warfare grows. So what I've said is this. This is what America looks like today. So many people afraid of their fellow man and of their government. The love of guns is now likened to the love of God and country, and people insist that it is their constitutional and God-given right to own as many guns as they want to. There is no constitutional right to own a gun. The Second Amendment refers to the right of the people to form a militia, and they have done that. It is our National Guard. Gun ownership is a privilege because the ability to use one can be taken away. And there is no true religion that sees guns as their salvation. Jesus never advocated violence. And while people blame the NRA, the true culprits are the gun industry. The NRA is just their lobbying group, their mouthpiece, and with all the money they receive from the industry, they appear powerful. But it is the gun industry that is very powerful. The gun industry is behind all our wars, our neoliberal politicians, and the video games and movies that you see. Hollywood is their other mouthpiece. The gun industry has no problem supporting war movies with weaponry and experts, even when it's one that condemns the U.S. It doesn't matter. It's all the guns and killing that the gun industry cares about. The military-industrial complex, that's the gun industry. And I read that often Army recruiting stations are placed outside war movies. The young men, so full of testosterone and video games, sign straight up from the theater. And of course, the connection between video games and drone warfare is undeniable. I think what makes me the maddest is that they are marketing to our children. Video games that excite and dull their senses when it comes to killing and prepares our children to become fodder for the military-industrial complex. And all those cute rifles that are geared to the tastes of children. It should not be allowed. So here's what I want to see. Age limits for gun usage. Nobody under 18 can use one. They can't smoke or drink before that age. Aren't guns infinitely more dangerous? No more assault weapons either. Nobody needs them except the military, not even the police. Guns should be regulated like cars. You need a license to use one, and you are tested on your ability to use one properly before you're allowed. Gun insurance too, so if your gun causes harm, your insurance covers the costs. No insurance, then your gun user license is revoked and you cannot use one. As you can see, I'm not totally opposed to gun ownership. I just want it regulated. Now, I understand there is a strong hunting culture that trains children at an early age to shoot, ostensibly for food. I would not take away that right, but they, like everyone else, would have to comply with the rules. And perhaps there would be an age limit exception for this group. I think that in some states they can actually get a permit to shoot deer at 12. I know that strict regulation does not even begin to address the grave inequalities and lack of opportunities in our country that is causing so much anger and pain and needs to be addressed now. But what I propose in legislation is necessary if we are to protect our children and our population from so much unnecessary harm. So now let's talk about something closer to home. I'm sure that guns are something you all think about these days with so many school shootings. And I think you have good cause to be concerned about a disillusioned graduate going postal. If you would prefer that no guns be allowed on campus, you have the power to change that. You are the most powerful people in this school, and you can change things you do not like. After all, you have paid a hell of a lot of money to get an education that may not earn you even a good salary, let alone a great one. So much of the legal work is outsourced these days. Once graduated, you will be competing with lawyers in India. This school is very lucky to have you. If you walked away, they would lose a lot of money. This is a very exciting time to be a student. So many groups on campuses across the country seeking real changes, from free tuition to a greater response to racism and gender issues, not to mention the calls for divestment of fossil fuels. So there are a lot of issues you could have a real impact on. How about loan forgiveness when you work in the fields of social justice and climate change, or even free tuition? That's not unheard of. It is the norm in many European countries. Or how about something simple, like gender-neutral bathrooms? I've been in one, it's no big deal. And physically very easy to do, they just remove the signs. So here's the way to get what you want. Here's a crash course in civil disobedience. All you have to do is disrupt business as usual. You just sit down somewhere in the way of business as usual and you stay calm. No standing and marching. Marching can appear militaristic and threatening. No yelling, no chanting. Sing. Singing is uplifting and has been used by many great movements successfully in the past. In Estonia, for instance, at the height of the Cold War, the people liberated their country from Soviet control by singing. They started out by singing their national anthem, which at that time was banned, outdoors and in small groups. Pretty soon, the whole country was out in the streets singing the national anthem. There was nothing the Soviets could do. They just left. And if enough of you do it, then they have to listen to you. So if you get depressed about the world, and it's easy to do these days, the best antidote is to get involved. There are many groups to get attached to: Greenpeace, 350.org, People of Color, Bion, No New Jim Crow, Rising Tide. These groups are into social justice and climate change and are always looking for new recruits. I myself am a raging granny. We are an international organization that shines a light on issues with humor and song. I just love being one. Since becoming a granny, I've been chained to a rocking chair 3 times this year, but was only arrested once. Maybe next time I'll actually get charged. I should say that my views here do not necessarily represent those of the grannies, although many of them agree with me. So right now I'm working on getting the gun show published as a book. Once that's done, I plan to take my show on the road to community centers, schools, churches, anywhere people want to know the truth. I never expected that my life would go in this direction. I was only painting what angered me. But now I know that it has become my cause, and I'm very excited to do the work. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions, if anyone has any, and I think, Cynthia, if it's okay, can we invite people to come
Yeah,
down if they
please
want?
come and look,
Take
sure.
a closer look, some of these are small.
Sure.
Any questions? Yes.
I have a question. I was, before this Paris shooting, I was very, as I told you, my students here, I was born and raised in a country where gun is illegal for individuals alone. So for this, I'm a little bit difficulty understanding the Article 2. But anyways, after hearing a lot of my out of school people talking about this after the Paris shooting, I don't know what to think still, but they said, okay, if that's exactly why we should have done, because if that's the situation, somebody could just, control. I don't know how to.
Well, that's a bad argument. More guns make for more killing. The statistics show that people who own guns have a greater chance of being harmed by them than if they don't have one. And we have to take our country back. We cannot have it like this anymore. 90 people a day die in the United States. 8, yeah?
You say 90 people, how many people die in car accidents?
Well, what difference does that make?
Well, I've heard the argument, if we can save just one child. And so...
You know, they've done a lot of work with cars. Cars, you have to have insurance, you have to have the ability, you have to prove the ability to drive one, and you have to get insurance for it.
Is driving an automobile constitutional?
It's not a constitutional right, it's a privilege, because the right can be taken away from you.
Right, but the Heller decision said
Well,
that...
the Heller decision is wrong,
Oh, okay.
okay?
But I'm just thinking, is that a little bit too late for this country to regulate? Because I was going to say in China, we were born with the knowledge of we just don't want to, we just don't even think of that. So there's really less gun-related violence in a country like that. I'm just thinking in this country, it's been so many years, is it too late?
You know, I hope to God it's not too late, because God help us all if we cannot come to terms with this.
A couple more questions, if anyone has one.
What do you think it will take to get people behind the movement that guns should have more regulation? Because
Well, I know
there's been
people
so
are really
many-
afraid of the NRA, but remember, they're just a mouthpiece. It is the gun industry that's so powerful. And we have to take our country back. We have to do it on many levels, not just on guns. Yeah?
What do you feel about, I mean, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement and all the terrorist acts here? I mean, I don't particularly like guns, but it seems like you need a gun in this country to protect yourself in general, just from, even from policing. So let's say me as an individual citizen, I don't have a gun, but my oppressor does. And so what am I supposed to do? Hope and wish? Like, how do you combat that?
Well, remember what I said, your chances of getting harmed by a gun are greater if you have one than if you don't.
But that's not necessarily true in the Black Lives Matter movement. The majority of the folks of African American descent that have been shot have not had guns.
It's really horrifying. That last one that just happened, those white supremacists that white supremacists in Chicago. More than ever, we need a handle on it. More than ever. We've got to get rid of them. We've got to get rid of them. We've got to do a lot of things in this country. Gun legislation is really just one of them.
Let's take one more.
So I want to go back to your analogy you drew between Blackwater and SS. And, you know, a lot of things that you said, the overall themes in your presentation, I think I can agree with. Like, we should look at putting regulations on guns. We should look at what we can do to make it easier to go to school and so forth. But some of the things in your presentation, I think you should tighten up, maybe for other audiences.
Like what?
For example, you talked about Monsanto bought, Blackwater and some of these other things.
Doesn't that scare you? That
no,
big
it
bad
doesn't scare me,
company?
Well, it doesn't scare me, but one of the things that I just kind of took issue with was the connection to the SS, right? Because I think it cheapens the message.
I think it strengthens it. Why would it
SS
cheapen
was a paramilitary that worked for the Nazi Party, for a political party. It helped them seize power, right? It helped Hitler do his final solution. And the individuals that were involved with that were prosecuted for crimes against humanity. So you have a really different situation. You have a government using a paramilitary domestically to enforce their political point of view. Blackwater is a consulting group that's used overseas in a different atmosphere. So I don't think the analogy stands. I think it cheapens your message. It's a message that I agree with, but I think it cheapens it.
Well, it's interesting you think that way. I think it makes it more powerful. It's totally scary to me that our military needs a paramilitary group to protect them, our officers. They're the military, for God's sakes. Why do they need an outside group to come and protect them? And the money we pay for that, they make salaries that are 10 times what our soldiers make.
Let's thank Cynthia Linet for